Good evening. Last weekend I was hiking in the Highlands, and I had planned everything very, very well. I planned the route, I had the map, I had my compass, and I had my food. I planned everything except my accommodation. But the way I figured it is that I would arrive at the village of Glenforan in the late afternoon, and I would simply find a hotel or a bed and breakfast. Well, I was a little late getting to Glenforan. It was more like sunset when I arrived, or just about sunset. There was no hotel. There was no bed and breakfast. In fact, there weren't any people. The village seemed like the proverbial ghost town. So imagine my surprise when I suddenly turned around, and there, standing right next to me, was an elderly gentleman, white-haired gentleman. I asked him if he knew of a place where I could find a bed, and he simply turned and pointed up the road and mentioned a place called Tapestry House. Well, I followed his direction up the road. The road kind of petered out into a muddy track. I made my way up through the dark trees. I could see no sign for a tapestry house. But eventually, I did see a board tacked to a tree in fainted paint, Tapestry House. And I went on up to the house, not a grand house by any means, but grand enough. And there was a middle-aged gentleman working in the garden. Well, I got his attention, and he seemed like quite a nice, gentle sort of soul. He welcomed me. I made kindly remarks about his garden. He said, yes, indeed. He said, this garden, the plants and flowers here are so beautiful that, look, they virtually make the house shine. And he was right. Well, we went on up to the house, and he invited me in and told me to leave my things by the door. And as he was explaining that although the house wasn't large, he did have room for 4 guests, although very often he only had 1, like myself. But he said, I've never had need to advertise, for Tapestry House has a way of reaching out to folk through the recommendation of others, or like yourself, you simply stumble upon it. Well, come in, he said. And he ushered me into the lounge by a fire, and he poured me a cup of tea and a wee little glass of whiskey. Well, wanting to make some conversation, I asked, how did Tapestry House get its name? He said, that's a good question. He said, when I first moved in here, I didn't know. What I do know is that the house was called Oaken View, on account of those large oak trees out there, the woodland adjacent to the garden. Those trees that look over, that preside over the stream and the life of the nearby village of Glenforan. I thought to myself, what life? But he said, I want to tell you a story. Well, I always am in the mood for a good story. And so he began by saying, Michael, a few months ago, I received a telephone call from an elderly gentleman who wanted to make a booking at Tapestry House for a week. His name was Harry McNiven, a man in his 80s, full head of hair, although every strand was white, as David Campbell's. He was, how would you say, he had a kind of a boyish charm about him, like David Campbell. But behind his creased skin of his face and the faded freckles that would have given him his boyish look, there was what he called a sadness. He said, I can't quite explain it, I can't put my finger on it, but an emptiness. Anyway, Harry arrived with a small suitcase and a parcel wrapped up in a faded yellow blanket tied with string. Now, Harry was a quiet man. He told me stories of how he used to walk every day with his collie, Ben. by the small cottages, which reminded me very much of the cottages of Glenforan. Well, he went on, it was the Thursday evening of the week he was staying here. He came in, he just suddenly appeared at the door there, and he sat down in this high winged back chair by the fire. And then he poured me another glass of whiskey. He said, Harry asked me, had I ever experienced a presence in the house? You know, the spooky kind. Ghosts, that sort of thing. Well, then he told me, Michael, I have experienced a presence in this house, but not the spooky kind, but a kindly presence, as if something had lived in this house that would say, I know the special qualities of this place, of this Tapestry House. All I can say, and I don't talk about this, never really talked about this with anyone, but it makes me feel safe. It's a kind of protective presence. And what's more, I have seen it. I have seen this presence. It's a woman descending the stairs. She's in her 40s. She wears a pink top and a long summer dress with a kind of Laura Ashley type of pattern, much like your shawl. But it's her complexion, Michael. You wouldn't forget it. Her skin is like porcelain. It's beautiful. And I call her Margaret. I don't know why. It's just a name that seems to fit. And she has a smile which would warm the heart of anyone here who claimed to be afraid of ghosts. He said to me he found it funny talking to Harry about Margaret and his ghosts. But with every word he spoke, Harry's eyes brimmed with tears and his smile just became more radiant. And then Harry said, let me tell you a story. Harry said that he and his mother had once lived in this house. They had lived here at Tapestry House. He told how in the summertime he and his mother would sit out by the garden in the evening. His mother stitching her tapestry, one stitch to the next. He playing at her feet and the basket of wool sitting there. But his mother was fading then. Cancer had taken its toll. But she was determined to finish her last tapestry. For she said it was of the most spiritual place on earth. Well, just then, he told me that Harry got up from his chair and said, wait right there. He went out and upstairs to the room that you'll be sleeping in tonight. He came back a few moments later with the parcel wrapped in that faded yellow blanket, and he carefully untied the string. Well, I couldn't see right away what it was. They looked like picture frames, but they were upside down. I couldn't see what was in them. And then he picked up the first one, and he showed it to me. My God. It was Margaret. It was my Margaret, the very woman I'd been talking about, the porcelain skin, that warm smile. Yes, Harry said, Margaret was my mother, my mother. She wanted to finish that tapestry. And then he picked up the second frame and turned it around and showed it to me. Why, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever set my eyes on. Every color and shade imaginable was woven into it. It was beautiful. And then Harry went on to say that it had always been his intention to return to Tapestry House, to bring the tapestry, his mother's tapestry, back to its rightful place, so that all could enjoy it, especially his mother, after all those years. He said now that he had brought it back, and he knew that it was in its rightful place. He knew that Tapestry House would always be seen as a place of love and sanctuary for all. And in that knowledge, he could continue on his long journey. Well, the owner said to me that he didn't know at the time what Harry meant by his long journey, but he felt it had something to do with meeting Margaret. Harry left the next day. But then the man went on to tell me that it was 2 weeks later that something happened that sent shivers up his spine. And then he got up and he said, "Michael, come with me. I want to show you something." And he ran to the front door, yelling back to me to grab the torch by the door. Come. And he took his stick with him, and out we went across the lawn, past the garden. And we soon found ourselves in the churchyard, the local churchyard, where he had explained that he often went for a walk. It was unkempt. Grass was grown up, nettles, brambles. But he led me through it, shining the torch. And then we stopped in front of a stone, and he shone the torch on it. And there, inscribed in the stone, it read, Margaret McNiven, 1896 to 1940. Do you see, Michael? That's my Margaret. That's her, Margaret of the house. But look at what? Look. And he took his stick and he beat down the grass and the nettles and the brambles. Look. And there was another inscription. It read, Harry McNiven, beloved son, 1916 to 1998. Harry had been dead for some 18 years.